Hi, my name's Nicola Askham and I'm known as the Data Governance Coach, and I've made it my mission to help as many people as possible to be successful with data governance. And so I'm thrilled to be back at the Data 2030 Summit, trying to find new ways of giving you more practical advice to help you improve your data governance initiatives. So on today's session, what I wanted to talk to you about is embedding data governance to become a data-enabled organization. Now, I think the reason I wanted to cover this is the last few years I've presented in person, but sadly that's no longer been possible. And I started with the fundamentals, and then we talked on to managing stakeholders and things. So I'm hoping that if you're watching this, you've been doing data governance for a little while, if only a few months. And I wanted to try and give you some ideas for planning long term so that you can truly become a data-enabled organization. So the question is, what does data-enabled really mean? Because it's a term that I've seen quite a lot recently. It's bandied around, and if we don't all agree the same thing, then we might all be misunderstanding things and talking at cross purposes. Now, I'm a bit of a data governance geek, so of course I'm going to worry about definitions, but I think it's really important because you don't want to be saying to your organization, we should become data enabled, and then some senior stakeholder asks you what you mean by that, and you've got no idea. You look stupid. It doesn't help your case with embedding data governance. So what do I think it means? Well, for me, I think there's a number of factors that come together. And the first one is that data governance is operationalized. And by this, I mean, it's just happening. This isn't you as the data governance manager or data governance team constantly reminding people and nagging them and doing it for them. I'm talking about perhaps automating things where you can. So perhaps, you've been doing this long enough now that perhaps your data quality reporting is all automated. You use proper reporting tools with workflows to send things to data stewards. So this is a way down the line. This is definitely not in your first year or possibly even 2 years of doing data governance. But to be truly data enabled, all this needs to be happening as a matter of course. This is no longer something that you're focusing on in an implementation phase. This is all being set up and there's no manual workarounds. This is just happening. The next thing that I think makes something data enabled is the fact that data literacy is increasing. Now, I think a lot of data governance initiatives sometimes have problems because we've seen the light as data governance practitioners. We realize that we need to manage our data properly and become data enabled, but we forget that the rest of the business haven't actually been on that journey with us. And they don't understand what we're talking about. They don't even think about data, or if they do, it's a kind of necessary evil that comes with doing their job. So data literacy increasing in your organization means that everybody starts to have an understanding of data and the role it plays in their job. And perhaps not everybody in your organization would say they have a data role, but they start to understand that data does impact on the role that they do, and particularly poor quality data. The next thing I'd say is that data maturity is increasing. So, this means that we are managing our data more proactively. If you do one of the various data maturity assessments that are available, you're scoring at least in the proactive, but possibly even higher. But it doesn't actually matter if you haven't even got to proactive yet. The whole point is that you're on this journey and it's increasing. You're not staying still, or even worse, going backwards. So what you're starting to do is finding a lot more good practices around the management of data generally, so that this is all joined up. We're not doing little pockets or silos of good stuff around data in the organization. We're starting to look at everything holistically and really start managing things properly. And there's a couple more things that I think we need to consider if we're trying to really understand what data enable means. And the first one is that people understand the value of their data. So on the last slide, I talked about, people perhaps even thinking about the data, having that literacy, thinking about it. But now I actually want them to think about the data, that they understand that data is an asset and it does have value. And actually, one of my clients put it brilliantly in a workshop I was running the other day with them, where they said that, did you realize that data is the only asset whose value increases the more you share it? And I thought that was such a wonderful way of putting it. A lot of organizations still don't truly understand the value of their data, and they don't manage it like an asset. If you think about the assets your organization has, even if it's something basic like your buildings, you don't just leave your buildings to fall into disrepair and, fall down and have leaky pipes or air conditioning that's not working. You have regular maintenance of that. But, until we're really data enabled, we're not doing that with our data. We wait for our data to go wrong and then we run around and panic and fix it. But as I just said, we wouldn't do that if it was a building. So if we're really talking about becoming data enabled, we're talking about taking that same kind of mindset approach to our data. And we're checking on it, we're maintaining it and managing it so that it's always good enough to use, because we understand that it's a valuable asset. And I think the final thing is that data governance is becoming sustainable. And I think that's not a quick one to actually describe. So I'm going to go into a bit more detail on that on the next slide. So what does sustainability mean? Generally, we know it means that something's going to be long lasting. We definitely talk about it in terms of the environment these days. But what does sustainability mean when it comes to data governance? Well, I think there's a number of factors. Again, we're talking about things like, data governance being business as usual and in all activities. This is not just something we do on a small subset of our data to meet a regulatory requirement, or we're just doing it in one area as part of a pilot. We really do data governance now, and it's been embedded in other activities. So it doesn't have to have this big label called data governance all the time, but we just know any process that has anything to do with managing and sorting our data has a data governance element. As part of that, I think, if you really wanted to call this sustainable, all new projects must have some form of data governance in place. Now, I've worked with a number of clients who found great ways of doing this. And I think one of my favorite is to have like a project checklist that you give every new project that tells people what the minimum is that they have to do to meet the data governance requirements. And several of my clients have successfully managed to get that baked into their change management or project management approach. And it has really made a difference, because you have spent a huge amount of effort, I'm guessing, or you're in the middle of making that effort to clean up all the historic data, to get things understood and documented and good quality. So why would you want new projects to be constantly doing things the old way and not documenting data, not checking that we don't already have that data, making sure that we have definitions for it? So it really is important that new projects have data governance in place. And the same is true, in your operations department. Whatever they're tasked with doing and running on behalf of your organization, they need to understand the importance of data to them. Now, I find operations a mixed bag. I've worked with some clients where the operations department just get it. They realize that data is fundamental to them running the operation successfully. And there's others that just feel that, data is an inconvenience. It's the thing that causes them hassles and things to go wrong. So there are always going to be cultural changes, but this needs to be at the core of what makes your organization operate. We need data governance baked in. And there's a few other things. So, we're talking about, when you've got an MI or a BI team, your analytics team, they should be thinking about data governance as part of their job naturally. So by this, I mean that if somebody asks for a new report from them, they don't just say, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that. They say, okay, which data did you mean? Can you tell me which term in the data glossary that you actually mean? If it's not there, we make sure it gets defined and we all agree it. I'm sure many of you listening to this have had examples of MI and BI analysts absolutely frustrated because they deliver what they think the person has asked for, but the business user is just not data literate. They're not used to giving good data requirements. And so the analyst spends a considerable amount of effort. They create the report, they share it with the user who's requested it, who then says, oh, that's not what I wanted. And a lot of rework goes on. So we need to stop that. We need to, the same way as I talked about with projects, we need to start putting checkpoints in, so that when people ask for new reports, we're making sure that a degree of data governance is in place. Now, I don't mean anything any more onerous than you need. So the kind of things I was just talking about, making sure that they pointed out the term they mean in the data glossary, so that particularly if it's a term that's used in multiple different ways in your organization, that the analyst knows what you mean. And making sure that perhaps a data owner has agreed that that data can be used for that purpose. So these are all good things to consider and build into these processes. I think, you've probably been getting the message about the way I've been talking, but you've got to, have people not thinking that data governance is an extra thing. This is a conversation I have with my clients quite often, and I even did this morning, actually. That data governance is not an extra thing that they put on the end of their to-do list. It should be baked in to what they do anyway. So this is a mindset thing, that data governance becomes part of how I do my job, not an extra that I do if I have the time or if everything goes wrong and I need to worry about the quality of my data. So this leads really into the final thing, is that it's all around the culture change. You cannot get that mindset of people thinking about data governance, being as part of their job, until we've achieved a culture change. We really need people to embrace the fact that, we need to manage our data, because if we don't, we can't do whatever else it is that our job is supposed to be. And, there's a number of different methods and people that talk about, but I do like, Robert Steiner talks about non-invasive data governance, or like doing data governance by stealth. Now, I have some reservations about whether to do that as a starting point, but I absolutely agree that that is what you should be aiming for. Data governance doesn't need a big label or neon lights calling it out. Once you've got it truly embedded, it just needs to become part of what people do. But you can only get there when the culture change has happened, when people accept the value of data and understand that they have to be thinking about it as part of their job. So you're probably thinking, well, that's all very well, Nicola, you've convinced me that we need to make data governance sustainable, but how am I going to do that? Well, I think there's a number of things to bear in mind. And the first one is to really, really focus on the fact that data governance is not a project. Now, if you've heard me present before, you've probably heard me say this. It's a bit of a hobby horse of mine. I totally get that when you're in that very early implementation phase, when you're designing and first implementing your data governance framework, it may feel like a project. You may even run that first phase as a project, and that's fine by me. If that's what you want to do, to manage it and make it happen. But what you must not do is make it seem like a project to the rest of the business, because you will get people say the kind of things that they've said to me over the years, which is, I'll be really glad when this project is over and you'll disappear and I can go back to doing things how I used to. And that is not the aim of what we're doing. Some people like to call data governance a program, or perhaps you could call it a discipline, but whatever you want to call it that works in your culture, it's got to be here to stay. And so, do not under any circumstances let your business think this is a project and it's just a one-off. And the other way of thinking about it is not just that they can go back to the way they were. It's a lot of people think we have this project, we'll fix our data and then it'll all be all right. And we don't have to think about it ever again. And we know that's not true. We need this constant maintenance and proactive management of our data. Otherwise, the quality will deteriorate and we'll be right back there to square one where we started from. So I know I've said it many times, please take it to heart. Data governance is not a project. You're probably not surprised by the next one I've put up here, because, I did kind of labor the point on the previous slide. The culture change is absolutely vital. If you want to make data governance sustainable, you've got to get into the hearts and minds of every employee in your organization. Now, you might be sitting here listening to me say that, guy, oh, Nicola, that's all very well, but do you know how many thousands of employees we've got? And I know that sounds a daunting task, and you're not going to do it overnight. And this is why data governance initiatives, no, I don't say projects, can take so long. And I often say to people, you're probably talking about a year before you've got anything significant in place, 2 years before you could even say you're starting to embed it. So you've got plenty of time to do this culture change, and you need to do this by doing lots of communications and briefings and training. And anybody that ever comes on my training courses, I always challenge them to say, I do not believe that you can over communicate data governance, because you need to do loads of data governance communications in order to facilitate this culture change. And to do, to achieve all the things we've been talking about in this presentation, you need people to be, thinking about data. And to do that, they have to have a mindset shift from where they currently are or were, if you're part of the way through that journey, to this new way of thinking. But it is absolutely vital. If you ignore that, your data governance will not become sustainable. And even if you didn't call it a project, it will be treated as one, it will die off, and all your good work will be lost. And then I think the other thing you need to really think about is we need leadership from the top. Now, in other presentations I've done over the years, I talk about, whether we implement data governance from the top or whether we implement it from the bottom. And I kind of say, actually, you probably need to do a bit of both to be successful. But what you do need from the top is clear leadership. You need strong leadership who is championing your cause and supporting you in every way possible. And that can be, it can be your executive sponsor, or one client I've been working with. Actually, the CEO is not the sponsor of the Data Governance Initiative, but he's agreed to do a video to share with all staff because he really gets how important it is. And, I just think that's fabulous. What stronger message can you have from the top than your CEO doing a short 5-minute video saying how important data is to your organization, and that we need to adopt this data governance to really make it even more valuable and manage it properly. So I know as a data governance manager or data governance lead, you will be doing the majority of the work. You will be spearheading the charge to really embed data governance and make it sustainable. And I know you will be putting a lot of effort and energy into doing this, but you really do need somebody senior supporting you. You need somebody there making sure that everybody in the organization sits up and takes notice and actually does this. A few more tips before we run out of time. I think it's important to have a strategy, but not just to have a lovely document, but to actually execute it. There is no point having a document that sits on the shelf saying we would like to do X. Now, when I say strategy, I don't mean a data governance strategy. If your organization has a data strategy, it should be part of that. If you don't, then perhaps you do need your own separate data governance strategy, but have a high level, a plan, approach, whatever you want to call it. But it isn't just a nice document that you wrote at the beginning and shared with a few stakeholders. This is going to be something you have to do. It's amazing how many people spend a lot of time crafting beautifully written documents that actually make a lot of sense. They describe the right things for data governance, but they don't actually go around implementing it. They think that if they circulate a document to everybody, everybody will just get it and do it, but they won't. They need a lot of support and hand-holding at this stage. I think going back to a bit of a common theme that we've had going through this, which is you have to show value from doing data governance. And I kind of hesitated about whether to put the words in brackets because sometimes it's hard to show value from data governance all the time, but you should not be doing data governance for a best practice or because Nicola says so. You should be doing it because there's benefits in it for your organization. If what you're choosing to do at the moment has no benefit for your organization, stop it. Focus on fixing the data and solving the problems that will move your organization on, that will help them achieve their corporate strategy, that will help them reduce costs or become more efficient. Don't do things because it's best practice, because you will lose people's interest in it. You'll just be seen as somebody that's asking them to do lots more work for no real benefit. And then finally, going back to one of the points that we covered quite early on is don't take data literacy for granted. Now, very early on in my data governance career, I was accused of sitting up the top of my ivory tower preaching data governance to people, hence the picture of me. Oh, it's not me, but technically I am in that tower, and that's why you can see the words data governance coming out of it. You can't preach data governance. You can't just assume that everybody you're talking to gets it. You've got to really make this accessible. You've got to explain things in terminology that people understand. And you don't have to patronize people and explain terms every time you meet them, but just don't take the fact that they will understand everything you say for granted. Be very cognizant of that and be very careful in the words you choose and how you go about approaching that. So, there was just one more thing I wanted to say. Make sure you take everyone with you. This sounds like a big ask, but you're not going to make this culture change. You're not going to truly embed things and make data governance sustainable and get that data-enabled organization unless you get that mind shift. Everybody in the organization has to come with you. You can't do this as a little team or even one person, waving the banners and saying we must do data governance. You have to get everybody buying in and doing this. So I'm aware that I've covered quite a lot in 20 minutes, but we've now got time for questions. So if you want to start typing in your questions on the Agorify app, I will do my best to answer as many of them as we have time for. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I'm looking forward to answering your questions next. But if we run out of time or you think of something afterwards, please feel free to connect with me in any of the ways that you can see on the slide now. And so all I want to say is thank you very much and good luck with your data governance initiative.